Warning: this video will contain both minor and major spoilers for the Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom. It's also important to mention that everyone is entitled to their own opinion that will reflect their own experience with the game, and that this video reflects my own opinion based on my own experience with the game, and you are free to disagree with that. Sup everybody, Thomas here, aka Reshiram's trainer, and welcome to a different kind of video. So a little while ago, I put up a poll on both my main channel and this channel, asking people if they wanted to see me do a review of The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom after I'd beaten it. And it seems that the majority of you voted yes, you would see something like this. And so, I decided to start a new series, Reshiram Reviews, where I'll review any games that pique my interest, whether they be old, new, or whatever. A few things to mention before we get started. This is my first time attempting to do a review, so obviously it's not going to be perfect. This review will sort of be an amalgamation of a review, the general discussion, and comparison to Breath of the Wild. On top of that, almost this entire video is unscripted. Also, I do apologise for this video coming out late, procrastination just be like that sometimes. With all that out of the way, let's get started. I feel that the best place to start would be the starting area of both games, being the Great Plateau in Breath of the Wild and the Great Sky Island in Tears of the Kingdom. So I think I speak for a lot of people when I say that the Great Plateau is one of the best starting areas in any game ever, so the Great Sky Island had a lot to live up to. And right away, I'll say that while I do prefer the Great Plateau, the Great Sky Island is definitely a worthy follow-up, and does equally good a job at training the player in the new abilities in this game, which I'll get to later on. However, one thing I do have to point out is that the Great Sky Island felt a lot less open-ended than the Great Plateau. It felt more linear. Now while I know it isn't, and you can do the first 3 shrines in any order, it really felt like there was an intended path that the game intended for you to take, which isn't really a bad thing, though I do prefer the Great Plateau's more open-endedness. Next I want to cover the abilities in this game, being Ultra Hand, Fuse, Recall, Ascend, and Auto Build. So what did I think of these? Well, right away, I think we can all agree that Ultra Hand is a great addition to the game, and by far its most useful ability. It's basically Magnesis, but even better, and it can be real fun using it to put together a bunch of contraptions. Which brings me to Auto Build, which I think is actually a very good addition to the game as well, as it lets you save builds you made with Ultra Hand, and then automatically build them again if you have the materials. Now it is locked behind a side quest, but I don't think it's a bad thing honestly, and I think it's a decent reward for it. Now the Fuse ability I have mixed feelings on. On one hand, the concept is definitely cool, and you can make some really cool looking weapons with it. On the other hand, it feels kind of unnecessary in a way, and I feel like the game pushes this upon you by having most of the weapons in Hyrule be decayed, encouraging you to take the decayed weapons and fuse stuff to them to get their damage back. However, I'd have preferred if they just left the weapons as is. But of course that is just me. Now the recall ability, while definitely cool, feels very situational, and I feel like most of my uses for it were in shrines where it was intended to be used, and didn't have too much use outside of it. Don't get me wrong, there are uses for it, but they feel few and far between. Now the Ascend ability is honestly really cool, and can be very useful in certain situations, though there were several points early on in the game where I just forgot that I even had it, where it would have been useful. So, how do these compare to the Breath of the Wild abilities? Well, aside from Ultra Hand, I actually think Breath of the Wild had the better abilities. I remember there being several points in the game where while exploring, I come across something and I was like, I could use Cryonis for this. And then I remember, oh wait, I don't have Cryonis in this game. And I think we all miss the infinite bombs, especially speedrunners. Though I am honestly okay with the inclusion of bomb clouds instead. Now while I do prefer the Breath of the Wild abilities, that isn't to say that the new abilities are bad. In fact, they are still pretty good abilities, and help the game differ from Breath of the Wild. Now I will talk about the temples of this game, so if you want to avoid spoilers, click off now. Now the first temple that most people are likely to do is the Wind Temple, aka the Storm and Dark. Now each temple in this game as you work alongside another character and using their unique ability. For the Wind Temple, that character is Tulin, or Tulin, or however you say it, who is the son of Teba, to help you fight via Meadow in Breath of the Wild. Now Tulin's ability can be best described as horizontal Revali's Gale, in that it creates a gust of wind horizontally in whatever direction you're facing. This can be used to push certain objects, or even Link if he has his paraglider open, making long gliding sections even quicker. And I think the Wind Temple makes good use of it. Though the best use for Tulin's ability is literally everywhere else, because it is the best ability in the game. Now while the main goal in each dungeon is basically the same, sort of like Breath of the Wild, each one feels a lot more different, and more like a traditional Zelda dungeon. And even better, unlike last game, each temple boss is unique from each other, and the boss of the Wind Temple is Kolgera, who might be one of my favourite bosses of all time, and definitely my favourite boss in this whole game. What? That looks awesome! Kolgera. That looks awesome!
Must be what's causing the blizzard.
While it isn't hard, I do think it's quite enjoyable and has some great music to go along with it. While the first phase is easy, in the second phase, he will start summoning tornadoes like a Shard Aora, which can make things a little bit more tricky. And I recently realised that Kolgera is actually a reference to Mulgera from the Wind Waker, only cold, hence Kolgera. The next temple I will cover is the Fire Temple, aka Gorondia. Your companion for this temple is Unibori, who now has the new ability of being fired like a cannonball, which definitely has its uses, most notably breaking rocks. Now I've seen plenty of people online say that this is their favourite temple in the whole game, and while I get why they enjoy it, personally I think it's one of my least favourite temples in the game. But that doesn't mean it's a bad temple. In all honesty, it is definitely a cool temple. The gimmick in this temple is actually minecarts, and adjusting rails to reach new spots. Though a decent chunk of this temple can be cheesed with rocket shields or ascents, skipping most of the minecart sections. And the boss of this temple is Marbled Gohma. Now right away, I think it's really cool that they brought Gohma back. While definitely not as cool as Armor Gohma from Twilight Princess for me, I do think this is a very unique version of it, and makes good use of Unibori's ability. While the first phase isn't anything too special, I did struggle a bit with the second phase, largely because I have crap aim. The third temple I'll cover in this game is the Lightning Temple, and this just might be my favourite temple in the whole game, as it reminded me a lot of Arbiter's grounds from Twilight Princess, and interestingly enough, it's actually quite close to Arbiter's grounds on the map. Now your companion for this temple is Riju, who has a really gimmicky ability in my opinion. Basically, when you activate the ability, you can fire an arrow at a random target and she'll strike it with lightning, provided that it's within a certain range. Now while it does come in rather handy for this temple, it has very little use outside of it, and you might as well just not use it at all. The boss of this temple is Queen Gibdo. Now I think it's quite cool that the Gibdos make a return in this game, so it makes sense that Queen Gibdo would be a boss here. Now you actually fight Queen Gibdo twice, once just before entering the temple and once at the end of it. Now you were taught earlier on that Gibdos are weak to lightning, and also fire but mostly lightning for this case. So obviously you're intended to use Riju's ability for this, which I completely forgot to do the first time around. While the first phase is a decent fight, in the second phase she'll start summoning swarms of Gibdos, which can get real annoying. The fourth temple I'll talk about is the Water Temple. In this temple you're reunited with Sidon, who I'm sure a lot of people are happy to see. Now his ability is interesting to say the least. Basically, it creates a shield of water around you, which will not only take a hit for you, but also allows you to walk straight through fire and hot areas without taking damage. But the main use for it is for weapons. So when the ability is activated, if you swing your weapon, it will send out a wave of water to attack the enemy. This can also be used to clear the sludge, which is the main gimmick of the area. Now I personally almost never use this ability full stop, as I preferred using splash fruits instead, but it definitely can be handy. As for the water temple itself, my favourite part had to be the low gravity, because yes, low gravity is a thing in this game. Basically, you jump higher and fall slower, which I thought was really fun, and even better, it allows you to enter bullet time from a standing jump, which just sounds broken. Now the boss of the water temple is Muktarok, which is a sort of mutated Octorok that spews sludge and all that. But the best part about this boss is that he makes a giant sludge shark which he rides around in, which I think is just cool as hell, although it isn't much of a challenge. Now you're meant to use Silent's ability to clear away the sludge and hurt him. I just end up using splash hits a lot, which makes the fight a lot quicker, although the fight itself is quite tedious, and both phases 1 and 2 are basically the exact same. Now this game actually offers one last surprise, in the form of a 5th temple, aka the Spirit Temple. Now your companion for this temple is Mineru, whose character you'll learn a bit about as you play through the game, and might just be my favourite character in the whole game. Now the Spirit Temple was actually split into 2 parts, the first part being the Construct Factory, which is the actual puzzle part of the temple. See, Mineru doesn't have a body and is a spirit, so in a Construct Factory, you're tasked with making a construct for her spirit to inhabit. Now while the concept is cool, I found the puzzles quite infuriating honestly, and I don't think I did any of them as intended. Now once you've made the construct, you're able to attach weapons to it, one on each arm and one on the back, which is honestly a pretty cool idea. You then have to make your way to the Spirit Temple proper, which, while it has no puzzles, does have the boss, the Seized Construct, basically turning this into a giant mech fight, which I think is really cool. One other thing I want to mention is that at the end of each temple, you're given a cutscene that explains some of the backstory of the game. Now one major problem that I and a lot of other people have is that for the first 4 temples, the cutscene was effectively the exact same, just with minor differences. Thankfully, the Spirit Temple doesn't do that, and Mineru actually gives us a different cutscene, so thank you. Now, I want to briefly cover one of the most controversial topics involving this game, the timeline. So it's pretty obvious that Tears of the Kingdom takes place about 5 or 6 years after Breath of the Wild. What everyone's talking about is the past section of the game, as in like the memories and all that, and where that takes place. Some people think that takes place thousands of years before Breath of the Wild, once the timelines have converged. Some have theorised that it takes place before Skyward Sword even. Me personally, I personally believe that it takes place after Skyward Sword, but before Minish Cap and every other game in the timeline. Now, there are several reasons for this, though I won't talk about them here. I'll now be discussing the endgame and the final boss, so if you want to avoid that, leave now. Overall, I think the endgame of Tears of the Kingdom is a big improvement over Breath of the Wild. The depths beneath Hyrule Castle are basically a massive gauntlet full of enemies, even a silver lining was thrown in there at some point. And at the end of it, you have a horde fight against the Demon King's army, which is 4 waves of enemies, during which any of the stages you've helped out will join you. And afterwards, any bosses you didn't beat in the main story will then respawn for you to fight. But if you did free all 5 stages, then you have to fight any of them and go straight to Ganondorf. Speaking of which, Ganondorf in this game is a big improvement over Calamity Ganon. He's definitely a much more challenging fight, requiring you to be on your toes the whole time, especially in Phase 2, where he can flurry rush your flurry rushes. Yes, you heard that right, he flurry rushes your own flurry rushes, and you have to flurry rush that flurry rush back. Try to take that 5 times fast. So while Phase 1 wasn't anything too special, Phase 2 was definitely difficult, and certainly requires some skill. Phase 3, however, went the route of Dark Beast, sacrificing difficulty for cinematics. Though I'm not against this, because Phase 3 is a frickin' dragon, the Demon Dragon, and this is just the coolest thing ever. Although not that difficult, the sheer cinematics of it instantly made it one of my favourite bosses of all time. And that's just about everything I want to talk about. If there's anything I forgot to talk about, I'll put it on screen right now, because there's probably a few things I've missed. They're no good review would be complete without a score. Now for these reviews, I'm going to give games a score out of 5 fusion flares. Yes, you heard me right, fusion flares. I am Reshiram's trainer after all. So with that being said, what do I give this game? Well overall, this game was well worth 6 years of wait, and it is an amazing game, flat out. Now, as of the time I'm recording this, I'm yet to decide whether this destroys Breath of the Wild as my favourite game of all time, since as of right now, I've only done one playthrough of it, which was 170 hours, as I went for 100% completion. Though with that being said, I rate this game 5 fusion flares out of 5. If you don't have the game already, get it. It is amazing and one of the greatest games of all time. And with that, this review is done. So as I said before, this is my first time trying to do a review, so obviously this isn't perfect, and I would appreciate feedback on how to improve in the future. So with that being said, thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video. See ya!